Welcome to the Fatty Acid Forum, sponsored by Virtus Nutrition, the fatty acid people. Today we're joined by Alycia Bales, who guides us through a presentation from 2023 ADSA on how production responses to fatty acid supplementation are impacted by fatty acid profile rather than the form of the supplement. Let's listen in.
This research was presented at the 2023 ADSA annual meeting, and the title of this presentation today is called Production Responses to Fatty Acid Supplementation are impacted by fatty acid profile rather than the form of the supplement. Supplementation with fatty acids is a common practice, and they're generally included in dairy cow diets to increase energy density of the ration, as well as increase yield of milk and milk components. Additionally, they have been found to alleviate heat stress and also improve reproduction efficiency. But through research in the past few years, we have found that the fatty acid profile of a fat supplement can affect different responses within the cow. The common fatty acid supplements found in today's market contain three main fatty acids. The first being palmitic acid, or C16-0, stearic acid, C18-0, and then oleic acid, C18-1. And then they come in two forms. First, a prill, which comes in a mixed or enriched profile. So the mixed prill contains a roughly 30% palmitic and 50% stearic. And then the palmitic enriched prill contains roughly 90% palmitic acid. And then you have a calcium salt of palm fat, which contains mostly palmitic and oleic acid. Roughly 45-48% palmitic and around 35 to 38% oleic. Now, as we can see, the two prills contain a very low amount of oleic acid, and this is mostly due to melting points of the different fatty acids. And current prilling technology does not really allow for oleic acid levels above 10%. So in order to deliver more oleic acid to a cow, a calcium salt would be needed. Now, the fatty acid profile of these supplements are more so reflected of the byproducts used to manufacture these supplements and not necessarily with the dairy cow in mind. So research out of our lab has really tried to fine-tune a fatty acid profile that would be best for production responses of the cow. Fatty acid supplements have been widely used in research, but up until recently, the fatty acid profile of these supplements has not really been considered. There are three meta-analyses that are available in the Journal of Dairy Science. And when we look at the first one from 2012, they looked at inclusions of fat sources against controlled diets that don't have fatty acid supplementation. So they looked at the fat sources versus the control treatments, calcium salts versus the control treatments, as well as prills versus the control treatments. Now, in the prills versus the control treatment, they don't separate out the prills, so you have different fatty acid profiles within that comparison. And then recently, there have been two meta-analyses that have come out of our lab that looked at prills and calcium salts separately. So in the first one, just looking at the effects of calcium salts versus a control diet. And then the second one was actually able to evaluate fatty acid profile within the prills as they considered prills against a control treatment, and then the palmitic enriched prill versus the mix of palmitic and stearic. But overall, there is not very many studies that truly look at fatty acid profiles against each other, as well as there are no direct comparisons of the types of fatty acid supplements or the forms of these supplements. In our lab, we have really focused on the fatty acid profile of the supplement. So in order to manipulate the fatty acid profile, we have blended multiple fat products together to achieve our desired ratios. And we've done a large focus on palmitic to oleic acid ratios. And in two different studies, we have found that lower producing cows producing around 45-ish kilos responded best to more palmitic acid in their blends, whereas higher producing cows, around that 55 kilo mark and above, actually produced more with more oleic in their blends. But a question that's been raised is it truly the fatty acid profile of these supplemental blends, or is it the form due to the fact that our fatty acid blends are a combination of a prill and a calcium salt? So is it the fatty acid profile or the form that's actually influencing these cows' performances? So the objective of this study was to determine if production responses and nutrient digestibility are influenced more by the form of the product or the fatty acid profile of that supplement. We had two hypotheses. The first being that when we compare the form of the supplement, there will be no difference between a 70% palmitic, 20% oleic fatty acid blend versus a calcium salt with the same profile. And then the second being that when we compare the fatty acid profile of a supplement, responses will differ depending on the amount of palmitic to oleic acid in two different calcium salts. For this study, we utilized 20 multiparous cows in a 4x4 Latin square design. These cows averaged around 44 kilos of milk yield and 99 days in milk. We had 4 treatments, the first being a control treatment of no additional fatty acid supplementation, and then 70 FB, which was a 70% palmitic, 20% oleic acid blend, 70 CS, which was a 70% palmitic, 20% oleic calcium salt, and then 45 CS, which was approximately 45% palmitic and 35% oleic acid, which I'm calling the traditional calcium salt and is one that you can find on the market today. Now, all 3 of these fatty acid treatments were fed to supply 2% fatty acids of diet dry matter. And then during the sampling periods, they were 21 days in length and had 5 sampling days at the end of each period. This table has an overview of the fatty acid profile of our fatty acid treatments. So as we look, again, we wanted to have 2 different supplements that had the same profile and then 2 calcium salts that had differing fatty acid profiles. So when we look at the palmitic acid level in these treatments, we can see that both 70 FB and 70 CS have similar palmitic acid levels, whereas the 45 CS has closer to 45% palmitic. And then when we look at oleic, again, the 70 FB and the 70 CS treatment have roughly the same amount of oleic acid, whereas the 45 CS treatment has a higher amount of oleic acid. Now, in order to get our 70 FB, we blended together a palmitic acid-rich prill and the same calcium salt that was used for the 45 CS treatment. It was approximately a 50-50 mixture to get us that 70-20 ratio. For the diet, we fed a typical Midwestern diet full of corn and alfalfa silages. The diets were similar across the board, except for each fatty acid treatment diet got the respective fat supplement, either the blend or the calcium salts, and the fatty acid supplements replaced soybean hulls in the control diet. As mentioned, our sampling period was the last 5 days of each period, and they fell on days 17 through 21. Feed ingredients and orts were collected daily, and feces were collected every 15 hours. We used INDF as a marker for total tract nutrient digestibility. Blood samples were collected twice on day 21, 15 hours apart. Milk samples and milk yield were collected 3 times per day, and we analyzed milk for components and fatty acid profile. Additionally, body condition scores recorded on day 21. Throughout the study, body weight was recorded 3 times a week, and feed intake was measured daily. For a statistical model, we ran the statistics through Proclimix of SAS, considering the random effective cow nested square, the fixed effective period, as well as the fixed effective treatment. Main effects were significant at p less than or equal to 0.05 and tendencies at p less than or equal to 0.10. We additionally had 3 pre-planned contrasts. The first was control versus fat, where fat was the average of the 3 fatty acid treatments, and then the effective form, which was the 70 FB versus the 70 CS, and then the effective profile, which was the 70 CS versus the 45 CS. Now to get into the results. For all my graphs, the variable of interest will be on the y-axis with treatment across the x. Additionally, below each of my graphs, I will have p-values where anything bolded is significant. For dry matter intake, there was an overall effect of fat to decrease intake, but I really want to focus on the form and the profile, where we did not have an effective form for dry matter intake, whereas profile was affected, with the 70CS treatment increasing intake by about 1 kilo compared to the 45CS treatment. Now that transitioned into total fatty acid intake of the 70CS treatment increasing fatty acid intake by 45 grams per day compared to the 45CS treatment. There was, again, no effect of form, and as would be expected, overall fat increased total fatty acid intake when compared to control. Now to look at nutrient digestibility, there was an overall effect of form, with the 70FB treatment increasing dry matter digestibility by 2.6 percentage units when compared to the 70CS treatment, although there was no effect on profile. Additionally, NDF digestibility had a very similar trend where the 70FB treatment increased NDF digestibility by 2.6 percentage units when compared to the 70CS treatment. And then looking into fatty acid digestibility, I have it broken out by 16 carbon, 18 carbon, and total fatty acid digestibility. First, I want to just look at the effect of form. So when we look at 16 carbon digestibility, the 70CS treatment increased compared to the 70FB treatment by about 7 percentage units. And then 18 carbon fatty acid digestibility was actually increased with 70FB by about 3 percentage units when compared to 70CS. Now, although there was differences in both 16 and 18 carbon fatty acids for form, there was no effect on total fatty acids for the form effect. Whereas when we now look into profile, the 45CS treatment increased 16 carbon digestibility by 4.2 percentage units compared to the 70CS treatment. There was no effect of 18 carbons, and this led to an increase in total fatty acid digestibility by about 2 percentage units for the 45CS treatment compared to the 70CS treatment. But overall, when we look at total fatty acid absorption, although there was an effect on 16 and 18 carbons, there was no effect of total fatty acid absorbed for the effect of form or for the effect of profile. Whereas overall fat increased total fatty acid absorbed by about 405 grams per day when compared to control. And now to look into milk production. Overall, when we look at milk yield, there was no effect of form, whereas the 45CS treatment increased milk yield by almost 2 kilos when compared to the 70CS treatment. And there was no effect of form or profile on fat-corrected milk, whereas overall fat had an increase of about 1 kilo when compared to control. And then splitting out milk components, first looking at milk fat, there was, again, no effect of form, whereas the 70CS treatment increased milk fat by about 40 grams per day when compared to the 45CS treatment. And then looking at milk protein, again, no effect of form, whereas the 45CS treatment increased milk protein by about 20 grams per day when compared to 70CS. Additionally, if we just look at overall fat, milk fat was increased by 60 grams per day with the inclusion of fatty acid treatments, whereas milk protein was decreased by 50 grams per day. So in summary, if we split out both form and profile, first looking at form, again, it was a 70-20 palmitic to oleic fatty acid blend versus a 70-20 palmitic to oleic calcium salt. We saw no differences in production responses between these two treatments, but there were some minor differences in digestibility. Whereas for the effective profile, again, that 70-20 calcium salt treatment versus a 45-35, again, palmitic to oleic ratio calcium salt, we found differences in intake, digestibility, and production responses. So some implications that can come about from this is that even though we did see minor digestibility differences between the 70-20 fatty acid blend and the 70-20 calcium salt, because of the lack of difference between these two treatments for production responses, our results indicate that the producers who do include fat supplements on their farm can include a single calcium salt or a blend of products that will achieve the same fatty acid profile and still have similar effects on production responses. So from this study, we feel comfortable to say that fatty acid profile of the supplement is more important than the form of the product. And with that, I'd like to thank my lab group, the MSU Dairy Farm staff, Purdue Agribusiness for donation of the fat supplements, and Caledonia Farms Elevator. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, please email me at the email on this slide.